What is your true creepy story? Story 1. I come from a small city in Australia. About 20 years ago, a girl went missing, Rihanna Barrow, and the case has never been solved. Sadly, I think it's been long forgotten, but at the time it was a major news story. Anyway, about a month after her disappearance, myself and a friend were walking through a park around the area she vanished from. We were about 11 at the time. We stepped out onto this street and saw a boy around 7 years old hurrying down the road. A car was following him slowly, about 10 meters behind. We thought it looked strange, and my friend, being a bit more switched on than me, called to the kid pretending to be a friend, and he ran over. The car stopped in the middle of the street. We couldn't see who was in it, but there were 2 men inside. After a long standoff, my heart pounding in my chest, as we could all sense something was wrong, the car slowly pulled away and headed down another street. One of them waved out the window at us. The kid said it had followed him from the corner store a few blocks away. My biggest regret was that after walking with this kid back to his house, which was only a few streets away, we sort of decided not to tell anyone, and I don't know why. Story 2. When I lived in Jefferson Park in Chicago, I would take the Blue Line home from work at night and cut through the park on my way back to my apartment. One night, after I had just gotten off an 11-hour shift, I was walking through the park like usual towards Lawrence Avenue. Usually I'm the only one there, or there's another commuter walking home with me. This time, as I'm walking through alone, this guy walks out of the shadows next to the community center in the park and is now walking about 15 meters behind me. No big deal. I figured he had just gone to use the bushes, which I had done on many occasions after a night of drinking. So I'm walking along and I realize this guy is now about 5 meters behind me, but he's not trying to pass me. He's matching my pace. At this point, I'm on Lawrence and I'm still thinking he's probably just walking home too. I go to cross the street a couple blocks away, and when I turn to see if there's a car coming, I see he's even closer to me. Like really close, weird. He crosses with me and starts walking faster to keep up as I speed up my pace. Now this is really weird. I cross the street again at a random part to see if he follows. He does. I cross the street again. He follows again. He's definitely following me. So, as I'm nearing my apartment, I realize I don't want this guy to know where I live. So I stop, pull out my knife, and turn around. We make eye contact for what felt like 5 minutes, but was probably only about 25 seconds. Neither of us says a word. He doesn't look scared, but he looks surprised. I turn back around and keep walking. He turns left at the very next intersection. To this day, I don't know if I saved myself from a mugging by showing this guy I was ready for a fight, or if I just scared the life out of some poor guy just trying to get home too. Better safe than sorry, I guess. Story 3. Back when I was in the Army, we ran into something pretty unexplainable during a regular navigation exercise. Navigation exercises are pretty standard throughout the world. Given a map and some coordinates, you have to find checkpoints using a compass. Of course, each squad was given a signal set to use in case of emergencies, or just to add to the weight they had to lug around. It's part of their kit anyway. There's a GPS embedded inside, but it's old school and gives coordinates only. Close to the end of the exercise, a squad had fallen hopelessly behind, but they were on their way to the last checkpoint. I was in charge of the last checkpoint with another fellow instructor. We knew they were around us in a 1-kilometer radius. Couldn't spot them due to the foliage. We waited and waited for about 1 to 2 hours. You don't mess up so badly that you can't figure out a checkpoint that's 1 kilometer away. We radioed them and didn't get a reply until half an hour after the initial call. They were frantic. Seemed like they were walking around in circles and seeing similar landmarks. It was apparently pitch dark where they were, and this was around 6 p.m. when the sun was only starting to set. The other trainer and I told them not to move, and we hiked to their position using an electronic GPS. And at the coordinates given, we found no one. The forest was also eerily quiet. No insects, no birds, just dead silence. It was pretty unnerving. The radio set was silent, not even static. We radioed them again, and they said they were at the same coordinates as us, but I saw no one. We decided to hike back to the checkpoint and wait. We gave them the coordinates to the checkpoint, and about an hour later they emerged. Took them over 4 hours to find a checkpoint just 1 kilometer away. During the final briefing, one of them told me they seemed to walk around in circles. They kept leaving marks on trees using a blade, but when they came back to what should have been the tree they marked, the mark was gone. They also felt like they were being followed, But that should just be the forest and exhaustion playing tricks on them, right? Story 4. Many moons ago, I was an editor. I was cutting a commercial late at night, and the deadline required me to stay overnight to finish. I was on the second floor of a 30-story building. Half the floor was editing suites, and the rest was rented out to various businesses like designers, developers, mostly tech companies. Except for one office, which was the largest on the floor and belonged to a psychiatrist. It's about 3 a.m. and I'm super focused on my work. I suddenly realize I'm starving. The deli across the street from me is open 24/7, so I decide to get some food. All the offices have sliding frosted glass doors. I open mine and realize the floor is completely empty and dark. Aside from the emergency exit lights, it's dead and dark. I get my food and come back. I close the door and watch some YouTube while I eat. Suddenly, I hear the elevator bing down the hallway. I knew that the entire building except for the 19th floor was empty. The 19th floor was occupied by some French company. There wasn't even anyone at the front desk. You had to swipe in with a key card at 2 doors in the lobby. I slowly slide the door open quietly and stick my head out of the office. Nothing. I see the light from inside the elevator casting a glow onto the floor, but I couldn't see in because of the way the hallway was set up. Eventually, I lock the office door, put my giant headphones on, and get back to work. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because around 5:30, a loud knocking on the glass wakes me up. I jump up, open the door, and see one of the building managers and a cop. I walk out into the hallway and hear a commotion and see more cops. They ask me what I'm doing there, so I explain. They ask if I saw or heard anything, and I say no, because headphones, and I fell asleep, etc. The cop walks away toward the other officers. I ask the manager what's going on, and she tells me that someone broke into the building, somehow bypassing the 2 doors downstairs that required a key card, broke into the psychiatrist's office, and stole files on 3 patients according to what the doctor told her and the cops. I was there that whole time either working or asleep and didn't hear anything. When she told me this, I almost crapped myself. I mean, to go after 3 specific files takes some serious dedication to your mission. All I could think about was, since it wasn't some petty robbery and there are tech offices all over the floor, I kept thinking what might have happened to me had I run into them. I ended up leaving that place several months later. Story 5. Background. I work in a solicitor's office. I'm a secretary. The receptionist was out sick this one day, and I had to cover for her. The reception is at the very front of the building and kind of cut off from everything else. You have to walk through at least 2 doors and down a hallway to get to anyone else in the building. Because we were short-staffed, I was completely on my own out there. Usually not a big deal. Anyway, this bloke comes in, quite tall, 6 feet plus. He's wearing old clothes and a baggy hoodie with the hood up. He has his hands in his pockets and is acting all shifty and paranoid. I go through the usual, "Hi, can I help you, blah, blah." And he's still acting weird, like looking around himself and not looking me directly in the eye. I really wasn't prepared for his answer. "Do you deal with armed robberies?" My heart literally stopped for a second. I didn't know what the heck to say to this guy, and there was no one close by who could help if anything happened. No one would even hear me if I shouted. This guy didn't explain himself either. He just asked that question and let it sit there between us. After the pause, I realized he wasn't going to say anything else. So with all the bravery I could muster, I asked, "Are you the armed robber?" and gestured to his hands in his pockets. He changed in a second. He obviously realized how he was coming across and didn't want to frighten me. He took his hands out of his pockets, pulled his hood down so I could see his face, and was just repeating, "No, no, love, I'm so sorry." He explained then that he was the one who had been robbed and wanted to take legal action, of course. By the end of the encounter, we were laughing about it, but for a good 5 seconds I thought, this is it. He's not going to be happy with the 30 pounds in petty cash and just shoot me. Story 6. My friend passed away at 19 from an overdose. This was over 10 years ago. We all went to the funeral and burial and helped his girlfriend move out of the house and back into her parents'. 2 months later, I was hanging out with my friend. It was late at night, which was normal teenage behavior. We were just sitting in his car outside his house when his phone rang. He handed it to me, and I looked at it in disbelief. Our deceased friend was calling, or someone that had his number now. I flipped it open, put it on speaker, and said hello. No answer, just clicking, and the call ended. I looked at my friend like, what the heck? and he said it had been happening the past few days and he didn't think anyone would believe him. This death hit home for all of us, but more so for him, since his sister was going to marry the guy and they got along really well. I called the number back. It was disconnected. It happened again a few weeks later, then stopped altogether. Story 7. There was a lady, my friend's half-sister's mom, if that makes any sense, who would cut my hair at my house. She had a boyfriend who I had met once, very briefly. About a year after meeting him, she came over to cut my hair, but this time, she unexpectedly brought her boyfriend along. I hadn't seen her in a while, and it seemed like something was different, and he was acting very odd. She went to the bathroom, and he began proposing that we hang out sometime, but she can't know. I'm serious, I said sure, just to get him off my back. I honestly thought they were on something, and I was just trying to keep everything peaceful and get them out of there ASAP. As they were finally leaving, he's behind her and goes to wave goodbye and throws a note on the ground that said, "Call me, it's our secret promise," with his phone number on it. I did not call. 2 days later, I kept getting missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. I never answered them. Then eventually I got a text message saying, "Hey, it's Ray," his name. "Can you please call me? I really need your help with something." I didn't respond. He kept texting me, saying he needed a favor. Since I never gave him my phone number to begin with, and since this man knows where I live, I was pretty alarmed. I tried to go to the police station to see if there was anything I could do, but the station I went to was not open to the public. That was the only station I knew of. I could have looked up another one, but I kind of felt stupid for being there in the first place, you know? So I just went home. The next morning at 8 a.m., I woke up to very loud banging on my door. I couldn't see anyone out the window, and I don't have a peephole, so I opened the door a little bit. I thought it could have been my parents since I live right by them. But no, it was Ray. He was pressed up against the door, which is why I couldn't see him out the window. He was smiling, and I quickly shut the door on him and called 911. He left before the cops showed up and sent a text message to the effect of, "I don't want to inconvenience you. Sorry to bug you." The cop told me to text him back saying, "Do not contact me in any way, shape, or form, or I will go to the police again," and made me take a picture of the cop car in front of my house and send that too. Then he left saying, "It's not illegal for someone to like you." Well, the next day I got another missed call from Ray's number, so I went to a different police station. The usual front desk person was sick, and the man filling in for her was a cop. He seemed like he actually wanted to help me, and after a quick type-in of Ray's phone number into his computer, he had me come around to identify his mugshot. It turns out Ray is a level 3 S offender, a child predator, to be exact. He wasn't even allowed in my state. The cop said that was just the beginning of it, but wasn't allowed to further discuss his charges, though he did mention that I was Ray's type. I was 23 at the time, but looked 15 or 16. Ray was 38. So I had to take screenshots of every missed call and every text message. Take pictures of the note. Put the note in a baggie and bring it to the police. I Googled his name and found some articles about him being a S offender. I printed them out along with my screenshots and took them to the courthouse to file a stalking order. It should have just been a harassment order, but the lady there told me to put stalking so I wouldn't have to pay the $85 fee. Eventually, the cops found him a few days later, arrested him, and served him his papers. We had a court date, which he did not show up to, and I was given a 10-year protection order. Last I heard, he was released from jail but went back for burglary. Story 8. One night, my sister and brother-in-law went on a cruise. It was summertime and a weeknight, so the streets were a little dead. We were out for about 2 hours before heading across the city to go home. We ended up behind this green Subaru. He was driving like he was under the influence, so we called the DWI hotline to report him because his driving was getting scary. We hung up with the operator, and just as we did, he swerved onto a side residential street. We called the hotline back and informed them what street he took, then hung up and took a sigh of relief since he wasn't on the road with us any longer. We were just about to pass the river and 3 miles from home when he came swerving out of a side street. My sister stepped on the gas to pass him as I fumbled for the phone to call back the hotline. I told the operator we had called earlier and that this guy had appeared out of nowhere again and was driving like a maniac. We were heading in a different direction than where we started out and on a totally different street. The operator accused us of following him, and I told her we weren't. I looked at my sister, who was absolutely terrified, and I glanced at the driver of the car. He looked unreal. I let out a little scream, and the operator asked what was wrong. This guy was aggressively staying with us, gripping his steering wheel, glaring at us with these wild eyes, so big and so round, like they were about to fall out of his skull. He looked so angry, and he wasn't even paying attention to where he was going. I told the operator that he was chasing us, and she said the police were on the way. I mean, I felt my blood go cold. This guy's face just looked insane. I'm assuming he was mad that we got in his way. He was absolutely livid. He almost didn't even look human. I kept saying, "Oh my God, he's scary." As he got super close to our car, I thought he was going to ram us. Then he swerved onto another street and out of view. The operator hung up after I told her what street he was on. My sister and I almost peed our pants. We were so terrified. The cop zoomed by us minutes later, passing the street he turned onto. I'll never forget that face. I seriously thought that guy was going to harm us. Story 9. I went to a cemetery with a friend of mine that was reportedly the most haunted cemetery in Connecticut, just to walk around for a bit for fun. I'll spoil it already. Nothing supernatural happened while we were there. Anyway, while she and I were walking around, a motorcycle pulled up and a man got off and began walking around the cemetery as well. It's a small plot of land. There's literally nowhere we could be where this guy couldn't see us. So we politely gave a little wave and went back to reading headstones. This guy took the wave as an invitation to come talk to us, and he began telling us how he rides his motorcycle all over looking for old cemeteries to check out. Seemed like a bit of an odd hobby, but hey, to each their own. We got out of the conversation and went to check out a few more headstones, which put our backs to this guy. When a few minutes later, we noticed he hadn't moved from where he was standing while we were talking. He had his phone in his hand, aimed at us, and we both heard the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter. He fumbled with his phone for a minute and turned away from us, pretending to take pictures of headstones. We knew he had our picture on his phone. She and I looked at each other, gave a nonverbal, "Let's get out of here," and went to my car to drive away. As we got in the car, we noticed that the guy had followed us out of the cemetery and was now sitting on his motorcycle, very obviously filming us with his camera. While I drove away, my friend watched the mirrors and told me that he never once put the phone down as long as the car was within sight. I hope I never see that person again in my life. Story 10. When I was in second grade, I lived in a trailer park. My sister was 18 and also lived there with her boyfriend, fiance, future ex-husband, but 8 or 9 trailers down. I got left alone a lot in the evenings, especially on the weekends, as my mom and stepdad would go out dancing at the bar nearly every weekend. One particular night, I was alone and watching TV when the phone rang. This was back in 1991, so we were just getting around to acknowledging stranger danger. So when the phone rang and the guy asked me if my mom was there, I didn't hesitate to say no. That's when things got creepy. When I told him she wasn't home, his response to me was, "Well, little boy, tell your mom I'm rubbing myself just for her, and maybe for you too." As a kid who had already been a victim of abuse for 2 years prior to that, I had a pretty good idea of what his intentions were, and I freaked out. I ran to my sister's place. It kind of ends there with no resolution. We have no idea who it was or why they did what they did, but it freaked me out badly. Now it seems kind of absurd, especially the voice he used, but back then, as someone freshly affected by trauma, it was a terrifying experience. Story 11. I had a stalker when I was a teenager. He was a few years older and lived a few streets away. I have a lot of creepy stories, but a couple stand out. Once the police came to my house, about 3 cars, and kicked down my door because he had called 000, Australia's equivalent to 911, and told them he was in my house with an axe, killing me and my family. Another time, my mom and I left the house so she could drop me off at school, only to find her car covered in porn magazine cutouts, with my name written next to all the females pictured. Fast forward years later, after I had my first child, my partner and I saw him at the shopping center, and he started screaming that our child was his. That very day, the police arrested my partner, saying they had received a 000 call from someone claiming to be my partner, saying he was going to hurt me and our daughter. He was later released after they determined the voice on the recording didn't match his. This was around 15 years ago. Story 12. In the early 2000s, when I was 6, I lived in a small town called Walla Walla. I lived in an area where the vast majority of homes were built in the late 1800s. We only rented the house for a year, but weird things happened a lot in that house. Things such as seeing someone walk into another room, but as soon as I turned the corner, no one would be there. Sometimes I heard someone call my name, but everyone would be out in the yard, completely fixated on something else. In my older brother's room, he said he could hear dog growling from his closet, even though no one near us had a dog. I'm a skeptic, so I usually explain those things away, except for one instance that, to this day, me and my older brother, who was 12 at the time, can't explain. My little brother had just been born 10 months prior, and my parents were completely okay with me and my older brother watching him while they made a quick trip to the store. Since it was such a small town, we lived only a couple buildings away from the nearest grocery store, which was as big as a Walgreens. We were also good friends with all the neighbors, so if there was a problem, we had people to run to. As far as my parents were concerned, we would be okay for 20 minutes. We were instructed to stay together, never separate, and not open the door unless we heard the secret knock. With this, we felt confident we'd be all right. Me, my older brother, and my fat little baby brother all sat on the couch in that order, watching cartoons. I looked over at my little brother every now and then to make sure he was content. He had his pacifier and favorite bear in hand. I looked back at the TV and within a few minutes looked back at my little brother. He was staring into my parents' bedroom. The lights were off, and all you could see was the silhouette of my parents' bed from the streetlights shining through the window. The window was the only thing illuminated inside the room. Everything else was pitch black. The house was small, so my parents' room was adjacent to the living room. Their door was only 30 feet away from us. His eyes were locked onto the bedroom, which sent a panic through me. I alerted my older brother, who shook my brother lightly and told him to knock it off, but he just wouldn't look away. Then he finally moved his head, as if he was watching something move to the other side of the room, back and forth, slowly, like something was pacing inside. I continued to tell my little brother to stop it because it was freaking me out. He just couldn't stop watching whatever it was moving in our parents' room. Then he stopped moving his head back and forth. His head started to slowly move up toward the wall and then toward the ceiling, as if something started crawling up the wall. He kept slowly looking all the way up until he was looking right above us. My parents did the secret knock, and my brother quickly unlocked the door, and I ran to them crying about what just happened. My parents, confused, turned on all the lights and found nothing. We creeped out our parents enough that we all slept in the living room together for a full week. Story 13. When I was in my early 20s, I was living in my parents' house at the time, and my ex had spent the night with me. I woke up in the morning facing away from her, blinked my eyes a few times, didn't make a sound because I thought maybe I could go back to sleep for a bit, when I heard "I love you" in this sleepy, hushed voice, clear as day. So I said back in a normal voice, "I love you too." All of a sudden, my ex says in a panicked voice, "That wasn't me." There was no one else in the house at the time, and no gadgets that could have caused it, and my ex certainly wasn't messing with me. She had no sense of humor. We were both weirded out by the whole thing. It was as clear as day, and we both heard it. About 2 weeks later, I was alone when one of the lamps in my room turned on. I just figured it was an old lamp, probably bad wiring. About a day later, again, I go to bed alone, turn off the lights, and get in bed. And I am filled with this immediate sense of dread. I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, not in a just-looking kind of way, but in a menacing way. I fought through it and finally fell asleep. I woke up about 2 hours later, still feeling the same way. Except when I woke up, I just kept thinking to myself about the lamp. Please don't turn on. Please don't turn on. Of course, boom, the lamp turns on. I probably laid in that bed for 15 minutes, frozen, before I got the courage to get up, turn off the lamp, and attempt to sleep again. After that, nothing happened anymore, that I at least noticed. This all happened in December, and my parents had been saying for years that a lot of weird things happened in that house around my grandmother's birthday. I had always dismissed it all until this happened. But again, after all this, I personally never experienced anything more, though my parents still claim to. Story 14. When I was 16, I was in a summer work exchange in Quebec, Canada. One night, I invited a friend from the program to stay over at my billet host family's home for the night. We slept downstairs in the basement, as they had a couch and a spare mattress down there. The actual event is quite fuzzy, but I remember waking up sensing something was wrong. I looked up, and there was a shadowy figure standing above me, and the figure touched me inappropriately. I didn't know how to react in my brain fog, and it seems the figure went back upstairs and out the front door. I laid there for a moment in the darkness and noticed that the stuffed animal I slept with, I was young and it was from my boyfriend at the time, was several feet away from the head of the mattress. Once I was slightly more coherent, I began to shake and knew I had to let the host parents know. I went up the stairs to the main floor and noticed the front door was wide open, with the sun just rising. This is when I realized that something disturbing had happened. I hurried up to the top floor to where the bedrooms were and switched on the light of the parents' room. I tried to explain that someone had been in the house and touched me, but keep in mind I was a 16-year-old kid in a huge panic. My many years of French immersion in school did not teach me the French words for anything like that. The host mother seemed pretty annoyed that I had woken them up. It took a lot of broken French and hand gestures to get the point across. They did contact the local police, and they sent an RCMP officer over who thankfully spoke English. Nothing ever came from it, and my friend who had stayed over slept through the entire thing. Almost 15 years later, and it still sticks with me. Story 15. My mom had a stalker when I was young. My parents were divorced, and we lived alone right next to the woods in a small neighborhood. I always remember my mom being pretty strict about making sure I had my windows locked and curtains drawn when I went to bed, and I never understood why until years later. For a year or so, someone, assuming a man, would come to our house and look in our windows. She told me a story. During Christmas, we were sitting around the fireplace, and she looked out the window and saw a guy's face with his hands cupped around his eyes, just staring into the window. She freaked out and called the cops. The guy bailed. Another time, she woke up to knocking on her window and this guy asking to be let in. She freaked out again, called the neighbors, who already knew about it. They ran over and called the cops. Nothing was found. Well, it snowed that night after it all happened, and in the morning there were tracks leading back to my mom's window. They tracked the footprints back to a hunter's stand in the woods by our house. That was where he would hide, apparently. The last time my mom heard from him, we got home from school while I worked one day, and there was a manila envelope on our porch. It was a news story about a woman who was harmed and killed. Here's the kicker. The woman in the story had my mom's same name. We moved pretty quickly after that. Story 16. This will probably get buried, but here goes. I was buying my first house and couldn't find anything I loved. My real estate agent told me about a place he was asked to represent that would be put on the market the next day. My mom and I decided to drive by the place to see if we wanted to schedule an appointment. For the backstory, the house was being listed because the current owner was going into a retirement home, so the place was empty. We pulled into the long driveway and parked. The house was adorable, set back from the road, kind of in the woods on a super private lot. We got out to start exploring outside, and a van pulled into the driveway, blocking us in. An older guy, mid-40s to 50s, got out and told us it was his mom's place, asked if we wanted a tour. We did, of course, not even thinking, and he let us in. We did the normal walkthrough, then he asked if we wanted to see the basement. The basement was more of a concrete cellar, and to get into it, you had to go outside and enter through a separate wooden door. My mom and I went down, and the creepy guy followed behind us and closed the wooden door behind him, essentially blocking our only way out. For those of you that have never entered a cellar, you leave the door open until you're done. He had been chatty and friendly-ish up until that point, but suddenly he was super quiet and seemed distracted and was giving me 100% murderer vibes. My mom was feeling awkward too, chatting too much, asking too many questions, basically filling the dead silence. Anyway, I noped out of there pretty quick because I was feeling super uncomfortable and basically pushed past the creepy guy. He was a shorter, thin guy, but thin can be wiry, and walked back to the car, talking about how we'd come back to do an official walkthrough with the real estate agent. Blah, blah. We got out of there fine, but I mentioned the creepy guy to the real estate agent the next day. His eyes bulged out of his head because he said the creepy guy had come into the office trying to find an agent the day before and asked for a woman. The female agent said he made her feel uncomfortable and creepy, and she declined to represent him because she didn't want to end up in a body bag. Story 17. I had an experience that was similar to a scene at the start of Get Out. I was walking down the street at about 10 p.m. or so when I heard that a car coming from behind me had slowed down but hadn't turned off to another street and was just lingering there. I kept walking, not assuming the worst but staying vigilant. The car eventually passed me and turned left at the next street, where I lost sight of it. But I knew it had immediately stopped because I saw the brake lights. At this point, I'm thinking it's sketchy, but I don't think I'm in danger unless a weapon is involved, because there were still a decent number of cars passing by and a busier intersection nearby I could run to if I really had to. I also wanted to give people the benefit of the doubt, so I just kept walking. Maybe the person lived there or was going to a friend's house or something. When I got to the street the car had turned at, it was turned back around, facing out at me, still running. That's when I said nope and just turned around and walked the other way. The car followed me again and was a little bit behind me when I turned and looked at the driver, some scraggly, creepy-looking guy. I just stopped, looked at him, put my arms out, and said, "What's up?" And he drove away. Story 18. One day back when I was in high school, I was home alone. It was afternoon, still bright out, so generally not creepy, and my parents hadn't come home from work yet. I had a desk adjacent to my bed, with both the desk and the headboard right up against the wall. I would often turn my laptop to the side of the table so I could browse while sitting perched on the side of my bed. So basically, me sitting with the laptop in front of me, and directly to my right was my headboard and wall. That day, I was on Skype with my friend, sitting the way I always do. We were talking, and she stopped me and said, "I thought you were home alone." I knew for sure no one was home, so I said, "Yeah, I am." She said, "I think your brother is home. He just walked past behind you into the other room." I froze. I knew for sure I was home alone. I do have a brother, but he didn't live with us at the time, and had in fact never lived in that house with us. He left for college before we moved there. This friend had never made a joke like that and seemed completely serious and nonchalant. I was about ready to cry, asking, "You mean someone went this way?" Motioning to my right, to which she said yes. I turned my laptop to the side so she could see that there was no other room or hallway to my right. As you might remember, there was a wall right there. And now I'm in my bed like 10 years later and scared again. Story 19. My creepiest, scariest moment I had ever experienced has got to be when I was 8 years old. I was living in a small neighborhood which branched off from a long road leading to the highway. I had recently moved to this new house, and I had a friend from where I used to live visiting me. One morning we had woken up to nobody being home. My family had all left to go food shopping. Anyways, we were just laying in bed playing Pokemon Pearl and Diamond with some music playing on my TV. We were about to have a battle when all of a sudden, my door flies open. Standing there is an older man, probably around 50 to 55, skinny as heck. Thinking about it now, I'm pretty sure he may have been on something. I froze. I was too terrified to do anything. He stared into my eyes for a good 3 seconds, almost as if he was deciding what to do about us ruining his burglary. Then he dipped. He ran down my hallway and out the front door. I then chased him out, where I saw him pedaling as hard as he could down the long road on a little kid's bike. After I called my parents and the cops came, it was revealed that all he really stole was some cheap jewelry and some money from my parents' room, but he tore our house up badly. I don't think we ever heard from the cops again about this man, but he had me scared stiff. Story 20. One night, while going ding-dong ditching with my friends, we came across a house with a light still on in the window. We looked into the window and saw a guy inside watching adult content. My friend thought it would be funny for someone to pound as hard as they could on the window. This is about the dumbest thing you can possibly do given where we were, rural US, as everyone and their grandmother has a dozen guns. Anyways, my friends had been doing all the other doorbells, so it was my turn to do this one. I went up to the window, pounded extremely hard, and then bolted to a drainage ditch on the other side of the street. The guy stormed out with a shotgun and a high-powered flashlight, so we were basically panicking and started shimmying along the drainage ditch toward a fence. Once we got to the fence, we made a run for it. The guy just screamed, "Get back here, you punks!" as we ran. We hopped the fence and continued running for what felt like a mile into the next neighborhood. We then found a small row of trees that we hid under for about an hour longer. Then out of nowhere, the guy drove up in a truck with another person and started searching for us with flashlights. To this day, I honestly have no idea how they didn't see us. We were wearing pretty bright clothing, and they were literally right on top of us. They left, then we waited there another hour, and then walked home to my friend's house. On Monday, when I went back to school, I took the bus home. I never paid my bus driver much attention before then, but I thought he looked familiar and couldn't place it, until I realized he was the guy I saw in the window. I kept glancing up at him to see if it was him, and he kept glancing at me. About half an hour passed until we came upon the turn into my neighborhood, and he passed it. Now this was weird because he had never missed it before in the 6 months I had been on his bus. One kid got off after another, and I started getting nervous. About an hour passed when there were just a few kids left on the bus, and he glanced up at me and said, "Sorry, my name. I guess I forgot to drop you off." I tried not to ride the bus after that. Story 21. My boyfriend had a meltdown over some home-related issues a few years back and went for a drunk midnight walk. I went out looking for him and started across the beach. The car was parked with the engine on, and people were inside it. Obviously, being a young woman, I started to panic and walked fast. He wasn't at the end of the shore, so I started heading back. The car moved and was now parked toward the direction I was coming back from. They started to drive really slowly alongside me until I stopped, dialed 999, and held my thumb over the call button. They opened the door and someone began stepping out. Then they got back in, shut the door, and drove off quickly. My boyfriend has felt guilty ever since. A few girls were attacked in my small town that year. I always like to imagine I could put up a fight if needed, but I froze instead, just waiting to call for help and run. Because I knew exactly how terrible and life-ruining that situation could have been, this is why I carry a small pocket knife, despite laws. Story 22. I made the mistake of becoming friends with someone online. I thought something outrageous would never happen to me, but what do you know? It happened. And it really taught me not to be so naive. I became friends with this guy. We bonded over political beliefs. He asked my name and my age. I never gave him my last name, which I'm thankful for, and I never told him where I lived either. But he started to come on to me. He kept saying very inappropriate things toward me and creepy things. I usually just brushed it off and steered the conversation to something else. Then when he wouldn't stop asking for my face, I called him out for being a little creepy. He then started to tell me things that I won't say here, as they're extremely not right things to be said to someone underage, which he wasn't, I was. He then proceeded to say those things and send video clips of him walking over to the police station and cussing me out. Apparently, I was the one in the wrong for calling him out. Being the naive person I was, I believed he was going to report me. I started having a full-blown panic attack and started crying. I've never even stolen chapstick from the gas station. How am I going to explain to my parents that someone accused me of something like that? He continued to send me videos and continued to cuss me out, along with bringing his girlfriend into the conversation to tell me how big of a you-know-what he had and how that wouldn't make him a creep. If anything, that made him more of one. He then told me he was going to hack into my phone and said he was always in hotels because he was slowly but surely making his way toward me. I know this doesn't sound that extreme, but it was a really terrifying experience to someone who's never dealt with anything like this before. I've learned my lesson and don't share any information that's too personal online. Basically, not to trust anyone online. I didn't believe those stories and I regret not believing them. I thought that he really was hacking into my phone and coming to me. But after having a long conversation with a friend who knows someone advanced with tech stuff, they told me it wasn't possible, especially with such little information I gave him. I was naive to ever believe him, and I should have blocked him right when he started asking what I look like. I regret not doing it sooner. It could have prevented me freaking out, but unfortunately, I learned my lesson the hard way. Story 23. This was 12 years ago. I was 14. My friend and I were quickly going through her house gathering clothes while my mom waited in the car outside. That night, there was a school dance, and the theme was the red carpet. It was right around Halloween, so costumes were encouraged. Cleverest decided we would go as hippies protesting the red carpet. We went through her mom and sister's room for hippie clothes, then went into my friend's room to try them on. I noticed a device that kind of looked like a cell phone sitting on her desk. "That's a really small cell phone," I said. "Oh, that's a digital recorder," she replied. Here, let me show you how it works. She picked it up, held the button down, and, as a joke, said, "Who are you?" into the speaker. She held the recorder out, but our smiles faded when the little red light started flashing. This, of course, meant the recorder was picking up a voice. We played the recording back. It was a choking sound followed by a loud moan. It sounded like a woman. We turned to each other and screamed. We booked it back to my mom's car and were freaking out. We played it back to my mom, and I think she thought we were making it up because she didn't seem to really care. We brought it to the school dance. I think the next night was our orchestra retreat. We were both in orchestra together, and we brought it there too and showed it to everyone. Lots of people didn't believe us. A few did, her mom included, and were really creeped out. My friend went on to tell me that in the past she had seen things in her house. One time she was sitting on the couch, and the lights were on. She was facing a window, and since it was dark, she could see her reflection. She said she saw a man behind her, trying to peer over her shoulder to look at her face. When she looked over, nothing was there. In another instance, she saw a man in her yard walk by. He turned the corner, and when she looked out the window, he was gone. But her yard was fenced in. I think the fence was at least 6 feet, and there was no door or gate in the area he was walking toward. A few weeks later, she accidentally recorded over the creepy ghost moan. It's lost forever, but I will always remember that moment and how unexplainable it was and still is. By the time we were seniors, my friend had moved in with her older boyfriend in a different city. She still attended my school, though, occasionally, was a crusty punk, hardcore vegan, worked on a farm vegan kitchen, etc. It seemed like she was really into the crusty punk lifestyle, and I kind of wonder if she was homeless. She seemed like a totally different person than the nice, innocent kid I met in 9th grade. Now I can't find any trace of her. I see her mom and sister occasionally around town and whatnot, but never her. Kinda sad. I felt like she got into the wrong crowd and is now estranged from them. Anyway, I guess it's not that exciting of a story. I actively try to avoid any ghostly situations because I'm so scared of them. But with this particular one, there was no avoiding it. Story 24. I was a teenager and a stoner. My friends and I would go out to this blocked-off bridge in the middle of the woods to hang out. There were so many dead-end signs along the half-mile or so to the bridge that nobody went there unless they were looking for trouble. We climbed up the sides, it was a trestle, went underneath it, really just got familiar with the whole place in the few months we went there. We did it several times a week. It was fall, around Halloween, 2011. One day we went out there near sunset and saw what appeared to be red pentagrams painted onto the concrete barriers blocking the bridge. As we got closer, we saw more pentagrams and other weird symbols, all painted in the same red. On the ground, on the trestles, everywhere. Not spray paint, but something that dripped and smeared a lot. We figured it must have been edgy kids with a paint can. We went off to the side, fixing to go down into the creek just to see the extent of the vandalism, when we saw a dead calf laying in the ditch weed with its throat slit. Blood was spread all along the blades of grass around it and dribbled up to the road. It also pooled quite a bit in the lower parts of the ground. Definitely dead, but fresh. We'd been there in the last couple days and there was no smell, even when we got closer. Got out of there fast, and the next time we went down, the whole half-mile of road leading to that bridge was completely blocked off. Story 25. When I was about 9 or 10, I was playing around with a couple of other kids in the apartment complex where we lived. We noticed a grown man, wearing respectable business attire, attempting to climb into a window in one of the buildings, a very narrow window on the second level. He was standing on top of a flimsy metal box that contained a fire extinguisher, and the window was still up over his head. How he got up to that point was anyone's guess, as it was a good 4 to 5 feet off the ground, with maybe 6 inches of surface area to stand on, and nothing else around to climb up on. We were so confused. Here was some grown-up, dressed like one of our teachers, basically breaking into an apartment building in broad daylight and totally oblivious to the 3 kids standing there watching and talking about him. This was Florida in the summer. The guy was visibly sweating, and we watched him struggle for a good 5 minutes before he finally did manage to hoist himself up and into the window, tumbling in and landing with a loud thud, followed by silence. I don't know why none of us thought to get someone. I guess the way he was dressed and the fact that he didn't seem to care about being seen made us think he belonged there, even though it made absolutely no sense and was a totally bizarre event to witness. Story 26. So my girlfriend and I were about 20, maybe 19. We were at a friend's place who lived in an old high-rise apartment building. We had a few drinks, smoked a couple joints, and had some laughs. I ended up buying some pot from him. It was pretty good and smelled even through the baggie. This was the 90s or early 2000s. Well, we were leaving and got on the elevator. He was on floor 18, if I remember correctly. Two guys got on the elevator 2 floors down from us. They could instantly smell the weed. I was drunk and stoned, so I can't say I remember exactly what they looked like, but they weren't the type of people you'd want to run into in a dark alley. They made some comment about how cute my girlfriend was and that we smelled like we were having fun, obviously pointing out the weed. We laughed and said we had a good time with our friends. So we get to the bottom of the elevator and my paranoia Mashu spidey sense is buzzing. We start walking to the right out of the elevator. They follow. I turn, act all stoned, and say, "Oh man, we parked the other way." They look at each other, very confused, and don't know what to do. So they slow down and start to turn around. Now I'm like, crap, that didn't work. So I start patting my pockets and say, "I forgot my keys." It's the 90s or whatever. I'm wearing cargo shorts and they are baggy. Thank you, fashion from back then. So I hit the button and we go back up. We start pounding on my friend's door, and he lets us in. We explain the best we can. He comprehends the best he can. We look out the window and see a car drive by on the side we said we parked on. Then a few minutes later, we see the same car. Then 10 or 15 minutes later, we see the same car again. Our best guess is they were looking for us. Well, an hour or so goes by, and we are all beyond freaking out, but the intoxication and adrenaline have kicked in, and we just wanted to go home. So we made a mad dash for it, got in our car, and made it home safe. Pretty nerve-wracking at the time, though. Always be prepared for any situation, I tell myself. Story 27. I used to be the manager of a small liquor store. I finished work late one night and then walked a few hundred meters to the bus stop. This was at the bottom of a hill in a shopping area. By this time, all the other shops were closed and the area was deserted and silent as a grave. I was waiting for the bus at the stop, one of those see-through plexiglass ones, when I got the strangest feeling. I stood up, stretched, and turned around, and someone's face ducked out of sight about 100 meters away behind a fence. The stop was at the bottom of a small hill, and you could see into the backyards of all the shops, with the fence lines receding up the hillside. He was about 4 or 5 fence lines away. I just stood there for a while thinking about it. I wasn't a big guy, but at 6 feet and 90 kilos, I wasn't that small either. Was this guy planning to rob me or assault me or what? Instead of sitting down, I started pacing back and forth. I didn't want to turn my back on this guy. Next thing I know, his head pops up for a minute again, but one fence line closer. He looked weird, kind of had a wild-eyed look on his face. He stared at me for a second or so and then ducked down again. I'm standing there, starting to get a bit angry. I'm not a particularly brave guy, but this was annoying me. Who does this guy think he is? What is he playing at? I started thinking about giving him a scare. What if I go around the front of the shops and try to come up behind him? As I was thinking this, the bus came and I got on. I never saw him again. Still don't know if he was planning to rob me, assault me, or just playing games. Story 28. I have a few, but this one's fun. One night, my sister, mother, and I came in late and walked from our car to our back door. We live in a woodsy area and have a man-made pond in our backyard with a small, dim, decorative lamppost next to it. As we were walking to the door, my sister remarked that the pond looked creepy and that it seemed like there's someone standing there watching us. We looked and agreed. There seemed to be an odd shadow right next to the lamppost, but it was dark, and we just joked about it. I remember looking behind us as we walked into the house to see the shadow still there, seemingly facing our house. The following day, one of our neighbors alerted my mom that they saw someone running from our yard to the yard next to us that night, and that they reported it. To this day, it gives me chills that most likely there was someone standing in our yard watching us walk into our house. We've had other instances of someone hanging around our house before, so we're lucky, but I'm always paranoid when I'm home alone. Story 29. One time I was out and I saw a driver wave at me. I thought it must have been someone that knew me or just a kind stranger. I couldn't see the person clearly, I just vaguely saw a wave. I like being friendly to strangers anyway, so I waved back and kept walking. Then I heard the car turn around and it stopped next to me. I didn't really know what to do with that, so I stopped too. Again, to see if it was someone I knew. It wasn't. A guy that was maybe in his late 20s or maybe early 30s, either way, at least 10 years older than me, was in the front seat and started talking to me. Now, he didn't kidnap me, which I appreciate, but he asked for my name and if he could get to know me, to which I kindly replied that I'd rather not, and then I went home. I made sure to wait until he was out of sight so he couldn't see where I lived. It could have been much worse, but it was kind of creepy. It's also not the only time someone significantly older than me flirted with me, which is also creepy. I think the scariest part of that is that he thought it was okay to make a complete U-turn and start talking to a 15, 16-year-old. Also, I look a lot younger than I am. I looked about 14 in my opinion, just because of a wave. Maybe he thought I was a prosti, I don't know. Very weird and strange. Story 30. This may get buried, but it is one of many creepy things that happened in the first house I ever bought. My husband came home from work one day and his wedding ring was missing. He was like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even notice it was gone. Maybe it fell off when I was fixing the dryer." Anyway, we looked for days. Now my husband had been losing some weight and the ring was looser on him. He sat me down later and told me that he was worried it might have fallen off when he hung his hand out the window while driving to work. Believe it or not, I believed him. Money was tight, new baby and all, so he decided not to buy a new one. He said he was hoping it would just show up at the house. Fast forward 3 months, it's just my 6-month-old and me at home. I'm exhausted, so I decide to take a nap when she naps. I'm half asleep, and a large whitish figure walks over to me as I sleep. I didn't feel fear at all, but it leans down, puts something on my finger, and says, "He lies," then disappears. I wake up and there on my finger is my husband's wedding ring. I kid you not, I was freaking out. And boy, did my husband freak out when he came home and saw I had his ring. I told him what happened, minus the "he lies" part, and he starts freaking out. He says there's no way someone found that ring and broke into our house just to slip it on my finger. He decided then and there that our house was haunted. And lo and behold, something was going on with him and a girl at work, and another girl before that at his other job. And then after he got fired from his current job, another girl after that. Of course, the last one was the last one for me. But it creeped me out then, and it still creeps me out now. Story 31. Although this occurred 10 years ago, it still makes me want to cry because of how scared my family was. My mom used to have the tendency to go to the laundromat about an hour before it closed, and since she would always take all the blankets and clothes, it took way more than an hour. So whatever she couldn't get done there, she would do at home. She would stay up folding clothes late at night, and since I could never sleep well, I would stay in the living room until she was finished. My dad was already asleep, and I remember it was about 11 p.m., and we were watching a recording of Don Francisco's show. Out of nowhere, the TV and lights turned off. This didn't scare us because it happened often. However, this time my mom had an uneasy feeling. She decided to stop folding and came to lay down on the couch with me. Eventually, we fell asleep in the living room, and at about 1 a.m., we woke up in pitch black darkness. The living room fan was on, but it was going faster than we had ever seen it go. It looked like it was about to fall off the ceiling. By the way, we had gone to sleep with the TV and lights on. For some reason, my mom thought my dad was pranking us, so she cut a few pieces of tape and put them against his door. That way, if he opened it, the tape would rip and she would know he was trying to prank us again. We decided to go sleep in my bedroom, which was across from my dad's room and next to the restroom. We eventually fell asleep, but at about 3 or 4 a.m., she woke me up because she thought she heard the bathroom water running. When we opened the bedroom door, we could clearly hear the bath and sink water running. My mom looked at my dad's door, and the tape was still perfectly intact. My mom seemed so scared, and that made me even more scared, but she was too terrified to walk across to his room. We began yelling his name and calling his phone, but he's such a heavy sleeper that he kept sleeping. I was so confused because she seemed so terrified, and she's not the type to get scared. My mom finally decided to get out through the window and go into his room since they were right next to each other. When she finally woke him up, they came to get me, and he went to the restroom, but nothing was on. You could tell they had been on, though, because everything was wet and there were droplets on the faucet dripping down. We did not sleep for the rest of the night. Eventually, when she calmed down, she told me that when they first moved into this house, the faucets would turn on and the restroom would be locked, like if someone had locked themselves in there and turned them on. I've never seen my mother so scared. It terrified me. I think this is the reason why I sleep with earphones now, to block out the scary things I might hear at night. Story 32. Many years ago at this point, my college was doing a production of Mephisto, which is a play about the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany, specifically how it affected the artists at the time. It is a decidedly anti-Nazi play written by an artist who fled Germany during that period. I was doing sound design for the show, and the director wanted one of the cues to be the Nazi national anthem. I went on the internet looking for a downloadable version and only clicked on links that seemed safe, sites dedicated to historical preservation. They all had disclaimers saying things like, "Look, we only have this because it was a song that existed and has historical weight. We don't condone Nazis." About a week or so later, while I was getting gas at the gas station near my house, I was approached by someone who said their sister had been arrested in the nearby city. I live in the suburbs, and they needed a ride to the local metro stop. Could I give them a ride? I'm a friendly enough person, so I said sure. The entire conversation during the ride was very leading, saying casually racist things about the demographics of the local high schools, how they now need increased security because of blacks and Latinos bringing weapons to school, and how the area used to be so much nicer, didn't it? Nothing overtly extreme, no slurs or anything, but it seemed obvious he was waiting for me to agree with him. I never said anything committal, just hmms and hahs. I knew I wasn't going to convince this guy that racism is wrong in a 5-minute car ride, and I wasn't about to get into a heated argument with a stranger while we were both in the confined space of my car. We got to the metro stop and that was the end of it. But I'm 95% sure he was a member of the KKK or a neo-Nazi who was trying to recruit me. The timing was too coincidental. The story about his sister seemed forced and didn't quite add up. The conversation was a little too pointed. Maybe it was just coincidence, but my gut says it wasn't, which would mean that whatever group he was part of was able to pinpoint my location in real life after I searched for that historical anthem. And that is terrifying. Story 33. Once, when I was sleeping over at a friend's house, I was laying in bed asleep and had a strange dream. It was me and all my friends playing volleyball or dodgeball, and then the other team, just a group of random kids I didn't know, came over and started chanting, telling me to shoot the door down over and over. Then the dream shifted, and I heard a voice. It was soft, light, almost feminine. It kept telling me everything was okay, that I just needed to relax and let go, that everything would be fine if I let go and let it take me. At first, I felt calm and reassured. I started relaxing, thinking maybe this was just how it was supposed to feel. But then I noticed a numbness starting in my fingertips and feet, slowly creeping up my limbs. That's when I started to panic. The voice changed. It was still soft, but now it sounded disturbingly sweet. I fought it mentally, thinking, no, this isn't okay. This is mine. Suddenly, I felt everything rush back into my body all at once. It hurt a lot, like a jolt. I finally opened my eyes. The room was empty except for the younger brother sleeping in the bed below mine. I walked to the living room and woke my friend briefly, then stayed up on the computer trying to relax. It was a really disturbing experience. I remember even more details, but I'm leaving some out to avoid writing too much. Still, it's one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me. Story 34. My whole life has felt like a creepy story. When I was little, my parents did a lot of drugs, so I was constantly exposed to their strange, often unsettling friends. Thankfully, my mom has been clean for almost 11 years now, and I've chosen to cut ties with my dad, so things are better. But back then, those people would ask really inappropriate questions, and my dad, who I'm pretty sure has some sort of untreated mania, would fill my head with bizarre ideas. He taught me how to read tarot cards when I was a kid, and told me that dreams were just glimpses into another world. He believed spirits followed him and were guiding him to some higher purpose. He even once told me that I was going to be the new Mary for the second coming of Christ. That's a terrifying amount of pressure to put on a 10-year-old. I also had at least 1 or 2 near-death experiences as a child, and that was just my childhood. As an adult, I've been stalked, groped, nearly kidnapped, and just generally creeped out by strangers. My dad's bizarre behavior still hasn't stopped. And despite how wild it all sounds, I do believe in some of the spiritual things. I've had experiences I truly can't explain.